drinking water is a lie. The water coming from her tap was brown. The boil advisory hit her phone as she mixed baby formula. 10 seconds. Boil, wait, trust the bottle stash in the closet. She sniffed the plastic and poured anyway. By morning, the headlines blamed a treatment plant upset. The grocery shelves were stripped to metal. Get this, people pay to get thirstier. We buy purity by the case, then learn later it wasn't so pure. Health, money, trust, all on the line. Today we bring proof, receipts, and fixes. Why spring water can legally be tapped. Why common filters miss PFAS. First the shock, then the receipts, then what you can do. How water became a product. To understand the lie, we go back to when water became a product. A century ago, safe tap water was civic pride. Cities cut ribbons on gleaming fountains. Engineers posed beside chlorination systems and sand filters like they were monuments. Public water was a promise. Pay taxes, turn a handle, don't get sick. Families filled cups straight from the sink. No one hauled cases. Meanwhile, something else was happening. Advertising learned to sell feelings. By the 1970s, jogging went mainstream, aerobics packed gyms, and a new kind of status emerged, health as a lifestyle you could buy. Plastic made liquids portable. Marketers saw an opening, purity you could hold. Here, as where it gets crazy, the pitch didn't attack tap outright, it sidestepped it. Natural, crisp, from ancient springs. Glass bottles clinked on white tablecloths. On tennis courts, logos flashed. At boardrooms, the bottle on the table telegraphed restraint and taste. The message slipped under the door, this isn't just water, it's you upgraded. Then in 1990, the myth met benzene. A lab in North Carolina found traces of a carcinogen in Perrier. Within days, millions of bottles vanished from shelves. The recall ballooned globally, over 100 countries, a brand in retreat. Press conferences insisted the spring was fine, that a filter mistake caused it. Spin tried to outrun regulation. The brand survived, but the reveal was blunt. Even pure needed human machines, and machines fail. What nobody knew at the time was how the rules advantaged the story over the substance. Tap water in the United States falls under the Safe Drinking Water Act. Utilities test often, publish reports, and face enforceable limits. Bottled water, it's regulated as food by the FDA. Different cadence, different categories, less frequent testing, and for years, hazy oversight on things like PFAS. If you're selling an image, that gap is a gift. Branding grew strongest where trust broke. In the early 1980s, a summer boil notice in one town turned into a marketing jackpot for a distributor with a warehouse full of cases. Each municipal hiccup nudged another family to add water to their shopping list next to milk and bread. By the 199s, bottled water wasn't a novelty at lunch. It was the table setting. And the language hardened. Spring, artesian, mineral. The geography did the heavy lifting. A mountain silhouette on a label shifted blame from factories and pipes to nature's theater. Never mind that spring could mean a borehole tapping an aquifer near a spring's influence. Never mind that purified could start as municipal tap before membranes and carbon gave it a second life. The category games were quiet but lucrative. Meanwhile, at the kitchen table, economics flipped. A family in the suburbs told me their water bill was stable, but some months they spent more at big box stores on bottled water than on electricity. The calculation wasn't rational, it was emotional. Imagine lifting a toddler into a car seat and scanning a headline about lead or PFAS or a boil advisory somewhere else. The safest feeling move fit in a trunk. This was the moment everything changed. The story beat the lab. Scarcity narratives, droughts on the news, megafires, rivers at record lows primed us to see water as a premium good. Private companies bought rights to springs. Small towns weighed tax revenue against tanker trucks and quiet aquifers. The public good blurred as logistics scaled. You could ship a belief across a continent for pennies per ounce and sell it for dollars. But there was one problem. Infrastructure still mattered. The same pipes that delivered tap to your sink delivered life to entire cities. Aging mains groaned. Corrosion control was chemistry on a budget. Capital cycles dragged bonds, hearings, rate hikes, elections. Utilities moved at the speed of public trust and procurement red tape. Marketing moved at the speed of a pallet jack. While that was happening in New York, Los Angeles, Dallas, everywhere filters hit kitchens, gyms sold alkaline like it was a vitamin, and stores stacked waters by pH, sparkle, and source. The promise, control, was irresistible. The downside, confusion, was profitable. Because when labels dance and standards split, people overbuy. And when people overbuy, someone tells you purity comes in six-packs. What nobody knew at the time was that a new contaminant story was threading through both worlds, bottled and tap, with the patience of a slow drip. PFAS seeped out of foams and fabrics into rivers and wells. Microplastics quietly flaked from caps and bottling lines. Regulators were late to the party. Brands were early to the shelf. In the end, water became a product the way fear becomes a habit, one choice at a time, reinforced by a price tag. The industry taught us to question the faucet and trust the bottle, even when both came from the same watershed. The tension wasn't cosmetic, it was structural. Utilities had to prove water safe every day. Bottlers had to tell you it felt safe at the moment of purchase. And here's the sting. Every burst pipe, every muddy glass, every out of an abundance of caution, alert didn't just erode trust, it fertilized sales. Which is exactly why the playbook you're about to see works so well. The trust collapse playbook. 3 days after the muddy glass, the school taped plastic bags over every fountain. The janitor twisted off handles so kids wouldn't forget. A third grader started carrying a case of 12-ounce bottles in his backpack like textbooks. His teacher kept a stack under her desk for kids who showed up without water money. The hallway sounded like a warehouse, shrink wrap crinkling, caps twisting, bottles thudding into bins. While that was happening across town, a press conference hit the feed. Out of an abundance of caution, the phrase floated like a life raft. City trucks rolled. A convenience store taped a hand-drawn sign on the door, 2-case limit. A distributor offered a coupon code and a photo of a smiling family surrounded by pallets. The image did the math for you, good parents plan. What nobody outside the industry saw was the choreography. First, the advisory, then the reassurance, then the partnership email, discounted pallets for the district, branded tents for the handout line. It wasn't villainy, it was muscle memory. Every failure at the tap trained a reflex to reach for plastic, and once a household switched, they didn't switch back quickly. The habit stuck like tape on a cooler. Meanwhile, premium labels used the moment to climb. A boutique brand donated cases to the city. Their logo landed in local news b-roll. A week later, sales ticked up at nearby groceries. The story was simple. When things get scary, we show up. It worked, even if the bottles came from a plant downstream of an industrial park with a shaky history and a public record of nearby well complaints. Here's the part that stings. The rules didn't match the ads. Municipal tap in the U.S. lives under the Safe Drinking Water Act. Utilities test on tight schedules, post consumer confidence reports, and answer to enforceable limits. When the EPA tightens a number, the utility has to move. Bottled water, it's regulated by the FDA as food. Different cadence, less frequent testing, and for a long time, far weaker attention to PFAS in labels and oversight. 2 worlds, 1 mouth. Parents felt the split every time a report landed in the mailbox. The city's PDF listed chlorine residuals, turbidity, coliforms, lead and copper rounds, and pages of language only engineers love. The bottle had mountains, a story about snowmelt, and a slogan about purity. One had data, one had feelings. Guess which one read faster in a fluorescent aisle with a fussy toddler? A mother in Jackson told me she kept receipts in a shoebox. She wasn't saving for a return. She was tallying the cost of distrust. In 1 month of boil notices, her family spent more on bottled water than on gas. Per gallon, the math was brutal. Water cost more than the fuel that drove it home. The landfill bill, that got spread to taxpayers and future letters asking for patience while the city negotiated a new waste contract. And then there's the twist nobody marketed. Studies started turning up PFAS in both tap and bottled samples. Some brands looked clean, some didn't. Natural mineral waters, untouched by law in some countries, sometimes carried legacy chemistry from rocks that had soaked up a century of industrial runoff. A purified municipal source run through membranes and carbon sometimes measured lower. The label didn't predict the lab. This was the moment everything changed for a family I followed. Their tap passed lead tests but tasted like a pool some days. They switched to a spring brand after a neighbor swore by it. Months later, a local paper reported PFAS detections in the aquifer near that bottling plant. Not a recall, just numbers in parts per trillion and a promise to monitor closely. They felt tricked. Not by poison, but by a story that traded on trust without earning it. Meanwhile, utilities kept absorbing the blame. When PFAS showed up, residents looked at City Hall, not the fabric mill upstream or the foam training pit at the airport. Lawsuits started stacking. Municipalities sued chemical giants. Settlements made headlines, but the checks didn't flip a switch at the plant the next morning. Upgrades took years. Ratepayers still covered bonds, design, and the time it takes to pilot new treatment like granular activated carbon or ion exchange. And in the aisles, discounts kept flowing. Buy one get one water next to chips, loyalty points for cases, school vending contracts that locked fountains behind sensors and put cold bottles at eye level. A student told me his campus put a fancy refill station in one building, then signed an exclusivity deal that made refills awkward everywhere else. The brand got a captive customer. The city got another kid who didn't trust the tap. Here, as where the asymmetry bites hardest, when a utility slips, it has to publish it. When a bottler slips, unless the FDA finds a clear safety concern or a state inspector asks the right question, the fix can stay quiet. The city's failure is public. The brand's failure can be a memo. That's not conspiracy. It's code in the regulatory machine. In the aftermath, you saw the pattern harden. People stacked cases in closets just in case. A dialysis center drafted a bottled water contingency plan. A mom's group shared a spreadsheet ranking labels by pH and vibes. The spreadsheet didn't list PFAS because the data wasn't on the label. It listed taste. All of this made one thing certain. While trust fell, a new villain seeped in, quiet and permanent. PFAS didn't care about logos. It cared about pathways. And those pathways cut through pipes, plants, springs, and bottling lines the same way. Forever Chemicals 101 told through people. From their perspective, it started with a rash that wouldn't quit. A firefighter named Lewis ran drills on a training field where the foam looked like snow every spring. He hosed it down, washed his gear, went home smelling like detergent and smoke. Years later, his blood work turned into a spreadsheet of acronyms nobody explained well. PFOS, PFOA, numbers with half-lives that outlasted resolution. He joked with the nurse, then sat in the parking lot and didn't start the truck for 10 minutes. The foam was supposed to save lives. It came with a bill he couldn't see. 3 counties over, a dairy family noticed the milk yield dip. The cows grazed by a creek the plant upstream called treated. The state called it within permit. The family called a lab. One test led to another. PFAS showed up in the water trough, then in the milk. A buyer paused orders. Bills didn't pause. They stopped selling and started calling lawyers. Meanwhile, a woman named Tasha opened her mail and held a letter about emerging contaminants at arm's length like it might bite. The town offered free testing for peace of mind. The tech drew water from her kitchen. Weeks later, a voicemail. "We found several PFAS. Please call us back." She stood by the sink, phone on speaker, listening to a stranger say parts per trillion and long half-lives. Years for some compounds, moving through blood and tissue like tenants that don't leave. They couldn't point to a symptom. They could point to a number. Here's the part that trips people up. PFAS aren't one thing. They're a family with a last name and too many cousins. They don't break down easily. They repel oil and water, which is why they slid into foams, pans, wrappers, jackets, carpets, and downstream into the rivers that feed the wells that fill the bottles that sit in your garage. The lab doesn't test for all of them. It tests for a list. The list keeps growing. Tasha did what most of us would do. She bought a filter that fit her faucet and promised great taste. It helped the chlorine bite. It didn't promise PFAS. Standard carbon can make a dent for some, then clog quietly and pass the rest. To target PFAS, you need the right media. Certified carbon blocks with enough bed depth, ion exchange that swaps out problem molecules, or reverse osmosis that forces water through a membrane fine enough to be annoying and effective. Even then, maintenance is the truth serum. Capacity matters, pressure matters, change schedules matter. Meanwhile, regulators were moving slowly. The EPA talked about enforceable limits measured in parts per trillion, practically whispering amounts, a few grains in an Olympic pool. States jumped ahead with their own numbers. Utilities ran pilots, granular activated carbon, then ion exchange, sometimes both. Some looked at reverse osmosis at plant scale and flinched at the brine. The chemistry worked. The logistics hurt. Where do you send the sludge that now holds what you don't want to drink? Back at the firehouse, Lewis and his crew watched a video on safer foams. They switched, then scrubbed the training pad protocol. Old habits were hard to unlearn. Lawsuits stacked against the companies that made the old foams. Settlements hit headlines. None of that pulled PFAS out of Lewis's blood. He started bringing water from home, then installed a point-of-use system under his sink. He kept the cartridges on a calendar like birthdays. Here's a detail that wouldn't matter until later. Tasha kept her lab report in a kitchen drawer next to warranties and school photos. The numbers weren't a panic, but they were a map. She picked a certified filter matched to the compounds listed, then tested again after install. The second report didn't read 0. It read lower. That's the game now. Lower, not mythic purity. You feel the difference when you stop chasing perfect and start measuring progress. A neighbor swore by a fancy ultra-pure bottled brand. The label ran on alpine fonts and a promise. A local reporter pulled a few brands and sent them to a lab. One Ultra flunked for certain PFAS on the list. Not illegal, not recalled, just inconvenient data. The brand said we meet all standards. Standards weren't the point. The bottle didn't tell the story, the lab did. Parallel to all this, doctors and researchers whispered and argued. Thyroid issues, immune response, pregnancy outcomes, signals emerged from studies, then banged into caveats. It wasn't a plot twist. It was science dragging a net through a moving river. The conclusion that stuck was simple and sane. Limit exposure where you can because the stuff hangs around. Meanwhile, something else was happening upstream in policy land. When the EPA proposed strict limits for specific PFAS, utilities had to prepare to comply. That meant budgets, bids, build-outs, and time. Some states set interim levels that were even tighter. Bottled water, regulated by the FDA as food, didn't face the same PFAS mandate cadence. A purified product could be clean. A natural one could carry legacy PFAS the bottler never created. The label didn't warn you either way. For Tasha, the breakthrough wasn't a product. It was a mindset. Test, choose tech that matches the problem, maintain it, and verify. For Lewis, it was policy. His department changed foam, his city started pilot treatment, and he got a postcard about a new dashboard that would finally show PFAS numbers in plain language. This was the moment everything changed, not because fear faded, but because action had a shape. And the next question was obvious. If Pure keeps dodging the truth on shelves, how do labels get away with it? The label, Loophole maze. To understand how Pure dodges the truth, we have to read labels like lawyers. Start with spring. It sounds like a hillside trickle, but legally it can mean water collected from a borehole that taps the same aquifer in the vicinity of a spring, then piped and processed before it reaches your cart. Artesian leans on geology, water under natural pressure in a confined aquifer, but it says nothing about what's dissolved in it. Mineral promises minerals, not safety. Purified can start as city tap, then run through reverse osmosis, distillation, or deionization. All of that is allowed. None of that lives on the front of the bottle. Flip it around, you'll usually see a source, a town name, a county, a well field. What you won't see is a treatment map or a running data table. Bottlers can publish water quality reports, and some do, but good luck finding PFAS numbers on the label or a QR code that lands on current lab results. In the US, bottled water sits under FDA's food rules, which means the cadence of testing, the contaminants checked, and the way results are shared are different from your utility's consumer confidence report. It's not a conspiracy. It's a category difference that lets feelings outpace facts at the shelf. Meanwhile, states add their own patchwork. A handful push for disclosure or tighter standards, others lean on federal baselines. Compliance is often self-reported, and proprietary process claims can hide behind trade secrets. If a brand touts a 7-stage system, you might get a diagram with icons, not the actual specs. Bed depth, contact time, membrane rating that tell you if PFAS, nitrates, or microbials are meaningfully reduced. The result is a maze. Enough language to reassure, not enough to verify. Then there's the pH theater. Alkaline sounds like health in a syllable. Stores display color charts and stories about balance. Here's the quiet truth. Altering pH doesn't remove PFAS, lead, or pesticides. It changes taste and can buffer acidity. Health claims tiptoe near supplement territory where the law gets even fuzzier. If you see performance promises, look for certification marks that actually test to a contaminant reduction standard, not just material safety. About those seals, NSF, WQA, ISO-sounding badges, some mean something specific, others just imply seriousness. A product certified to NSF ANSI 53 for lead reduction has passed a challenge test for lead. That's concrete. But a generic tested to standards seal might cover turbidity or taste, not PFAS. There are emerging standards for PFAS reduction in filters, but bottled water labels rarely tie themselves to PFAS-specific testing, and some certification bodies don't routinely include PFAS in their bottled water audits. A trustworthy badge tells you exactly which contaminants were challenged, at what levels, and to what endpoint. A gross story, a retiree named Ramon made a pH chart his North Star. He filled a garage rack with 9.5 plus bottles because his knees felt better after he switched. His granddaughter, a chemistry student, sent 3 brands to a lab. The report came back. High pH across the board, yes. No meaningful difference in PFAS compared to a cheaper, purified brand. And in one case, higher microplastics count, likely from cap abrasion, than the others. Ramon didn't toss his stash out of shame. He adjusted. He kept one brand he liked for taste and moved most of his budget to a home system with a clear PFAS reduction claim and a filter change reminder. Marketing leans hard on nature. Photos of snowmelt and volcanic rock imply filtration by time, but geology can carry history. If aquifer sits beneath a watershed that collected airborne fluorochemicals for decades, untouched by man can still mean touched by chemistry. In some regions, natural mineral waters are restricted from aggressive treatment to protect taste and character. That's great for mouthfeel. It's complicated for modern contaminant. A purified label that started at a city spigot and passed through RO and carbon may measure lower for specific PFAS than a romantic spring. The label doesn't confess either way. Proprietary shields make it worse. Brands describe nanostructured filters or electrolyte infusion as if jargon equals rigor. Electrolytes can mean a pinch of minerals for taste. Infusion is flavor talk in a lab coat. Ask for data, not poetry. Reduction percentages, initial challenge concentrations, end-of-life performance, and the standard used. If they send a brochure, you have your answer. State versus federal oversight muddies the trail. One state might require bottlers to submit annual water quality summaries. Another might inspect facilities for sanitation and bottling line integrity but not demand PFAS reporting. When an issue pops, recalls do happen, but absent a direct safety concern flagged by FDA or an aggressive state agency, a brand can soften language, swap pure for crisp, instead of overhauling process. Lawsuits have pushed some changes, especially around 100% pure claims, but settlements with no admission don't rewrite labels industry-wide. The cleanest way through the maze is to treat labels as clues, not conclusions. If source is municipal and the product says purified, you can infer membranes and carbon and look for a published report. If the source is a named spring, look for third-party testing that includes PFAS, not just nitrate and coliform. If a badge is present, check its scope. Real certifications link to a listing with exact contaminant claims and model numbers. If a brand refuses specificity and leans on vibes, believe them. They're selling vibes. When labels confuse, lawsuits sometimes clarify. But the best leverage still comes from consumers who ask for data in plain language and walk when they don't get it. Ramon didn't become a cynic. He became precise. He still drinks water that tastes good. He just stops paying for promises that never reach the lab. 3 rows back at the town hall, a dad in a ball cap gripped 2 test tubes like evidence. One was cloudy tap from the kitchen before the filter. One was clear after. He didn't raise his voice. He asked who was paying to make the first tube look like the second for every house on his block. The mayor stared at a binder. The lawyer beside him cleared his throat and said, "We're in active litigation." Litigation became the new water treatment. Cities started suing the chemical companies whose foams and coatings had bled PFAS into rivers and wells. Press releases called it accountability. Residents called it a clock. Because even when the checks landed, pipes didn't change on Monday. Engineering takes bids, bids take months, pilot systems take quarters, and rate increases take votes. Meanwhile, the kitchen faucet keeps running. Then came the headlines that sounded like reckoning. 3M announced a multi-year settlement framework, up to roughly $10 to $12.5 billion for U.S. public water systems. DuPont, Chemours, and Corteva agreed to around $1.18 billion. Journalists wrote historic. City managers did math on napkin, spread across tens of thousands of systems over years against equipment that costs 7 figures per plant and cartridges that need replacing. The money felt both huge and thin. It was relief and reminder at the same time. Here's the part the press conferences didn't amplify. Settlements often include no admission of liability and non-disparagement clauses. Companies write checks. Nobody has to say we did it on the record in a way that can be quoted forever. For families seeking clarity, it felt like paying to turn down the volume without changing the channel. The legal path secured money for treatment. It rarely delivered clean sentences about blame. Meanwhile, bottled brands got dragged into court over language, not just molecules. Labels that leaned hard on 100% pure or chemical-free met plaintiffs and state attorneys general who wanted the adjectives to match the lab. Some companies softened copy. Pure became crisp, natural became balanced without conceding a flaw. Settlements quieted a handful of claims. The shelf still glowed with glaciers and snowcaps. Across the aisle, investors wrote memos that sounded clinical and nervous. PFAS risk shifted from footnote to headline in ESG reports. Analysts asked executives about treatment costs, landfill liabilities for contaminated media, and the chance that the EPA's parts per trillion limits would force capital plans forward. The market didn't weep. It repriced time. When a water district told bond buyers it would install granular activated carbon within 3 years, the coupon inched. Finance became another lever. In a courthouse far from those spreadsheets, a mother named Alondra sat through a status hearing with a stack of medical records on her lap. Her son's immune markers had pinged odd for 2 years. No doctor wrote PFAS as a diagnosis. The family's tap had PFAS detections above the newest advisory. The city had applied for settlement funds. The judge asked for updates. Lawyers in dark suits nodded. Alondra went home and changed the undersink cartridges a week early. Unknown to most people in that room, the city's engineers were arguing over technology in a conference call down the hall. Ion exchange resins pulled targeted PFAS well but needed careful disposal. GAC worked broadly but required bed depth, contact time, and a change-out schedule that could punch a hole in the budget. Reverse osmosis at plant scale was clean chemistry with messy logistics. High energy, concentrate to manage. The settlement dollars would pick a lane. None of the lanes were free. Here's a micro-story that explains the gap between courtroom and kitchen. A rural township won a slice of settlement money and rushed to install interim GAC on a well field. The media arrived on pallets wrapped in blue. The first samples after startup looked great. By month 8, breakthrough began on one vessel. The operator filed a work order to swap the bed. The purchase committee met 2 weeks later. The council affirmed the spend at the next meeting. The new carbon shipped 3 weeks after that. For 6 weeks, numbers ticked up, not catastrophic, just up. Nobody lied. The timeline was a bureaucracy. Residents still drank. Lawsuits did move needles. EPA advisories became enforceable limits for specific PFAS in public systems. States layered on their own. Airports phased out old foams. Procurement officers added PFAS clauses to bids. A few bottled brands started publishing broader lab panels online, not because the FDA told them to, but because lawyers and customers did. And yet, people in folding chairs kept asking for plain language and dates. The non-answers weren't always evasions. Sometimes they were physics meeting policy. When will my water be safe? Depends on which PFAS, which plant, which resin batch, which bed depth, which lab method, which sample day. That sounds like hedging until you learn how close parts per trillion sits to the edges of instruments and the edges of budgets. At one tense meeting, a parent held up a postcard from the utilities PR firm that said, "Your water meets all standards." He asked, "Which ones? Yesterday's or next spring's?" The director took a breath and did something rare. He named the numbers. He named the timeline. He named the shortfall until grant funds arrived. The room didn't relax, but the temperature dropped. In the aftermath, you could feel two truths hold at once. Courtrooms made companies pay. Checks didn't equal clean glasses tomorrow. Lawsuits forced movement. They didn't replace maintenance. For families like Alondra's, the plan became layered. Push cases forward, vote for bonds with testing milestones, and keep the cartridges on the calendar. The story wasn't neat. It was work. The economics of thirst. Follow the money and the story makes sense. Bottled water is a cheap input wrapped in an expensive idea. The liquid costs pennies. The margin lives in branding, distribution, and the promise that you're doing something wise in a world that feels careless. A plant can fill tens of thousands of bottles an hour. Freight moves them by the pallet. The highest cost on that pallet often isn't the water. It's the plastic, the fuel, and the marketing that makes you pick that label over the one below it. A former route driver told me his bonus depended on eye level. If he won the shelf at your grocery, dead center, hand height, his brand moved. If he slipped to the ankle zone, cases stacked up. The same water in a different spot was suddenly less pure. You weren't buying composition, you were buying position. Brand stories add price like altitude adds prestige. Imported water rides farther on a truck, then a ship, then another truck. The carbon math is absurd, but the markups are tidy. Shipping water across oceans isn't rational hydration. It's luxury theater with pallets and forklifts. The bottle becomes a lifestyle prop, a table ornament, a signal. Entire categories thrive on that signal alone. Behind the label, contracts do quiet work. At schools, a beverage company wins exclusivity. That means the vending machines glow with cold singles, the fountains get finicky sensors, and the refill stations depend on how public pressure played out at a board meeting 3 years ago. Kids become recurring revenue. If a refill bottle costs $12 and a cold single costs $2, habit decides who profits. Then there are the water rights that make locals grind their teeth. A company leases land, taps a spring, pays a fee that sounds big in a council meeting, and hauls millions of gallons a year. It's only a fraction of the aquifer, the consultant says. Renewable. Residents watch tanker trucks roll past dusty wells and feel the math in their bones. The town budget gets a check. The aquifer gets a bill that posts quietly. Externalities hide on other ledgers. Plastic waste doesn't show up in the per-bottle price. It shows up at the materials recovery facility that can't actually recover most of what arrives, in the landfill tipping fee paid by a city 2 years from now, in the county's vote to expand a cell by another acre. Trucking emissions don't show up on the grocery receipt. They show up in particulate maps and asthma stats, far from alpine fun. Meanwhile, a parallel business hums in your kitchen: filters. The subscription cartridge model is a razor and blade classic. Pitchers and undersink housings are affordable. The money flows when you forget the calendar, and the light turns red, or worse, when it should have turned red but didn't. Some companies are honest about capacity and replacement. Others sell peace of mind and leave the details to footnotes. A renter named Darius learned to read those footnotes the hard way. He bought a sleek countertop unit with pods that clicked in like coffee capsules. Month 3, a slow taste change crept in. He checked the app. Filter at 62%. He sent a sample to a lab out of stubborn curiosity. Chlorine was gone. The PFAS his city had flagged barely moved. He switched to a certified carbon block with clear capacity numbers, then added a small RO system on the counter. Landlord said no drilling. He didn't. He ran a line to a pitcher. His follow-up lab showed real cuts. The cost per gallon fell under a dime. The plastic recycling bin lost weight. Households doing that math discover a quiet truth. The cheapest, cleanest water over a year usually isn't in a single-serve bottle. It's in a system you maintain. But you have to buy the right thing, match it to your source, and keep up with it. That's not as photogenic as a glacier on a label. It's more honest. On the corporate side, investor decks brag about premiumization. That's code for charging more for the same molecule with a better story. Add electrolytes for taste, sell a sleeker cap, print a new badge about pH, and the case price climbs. Consumers feel proactive. Balance sheets feel proud. Regulators don't touch adjectives unless someone sues. Microplastics complicate the ledger further. Every mile in a hot truck, every scrape on a bottling line, every twist of a cap adds invisible particles you didn't budget for. Studies counting down to the nanoplastic range estimate staggering particle loads per liter. You don't see them on a label. You pay for them somewhere else. Maybe in a filter you add later, maybe in a study your taxes fund, maybe in a gut that wonders why it's irritated. Zoom out and the economics of thirst look like this. Sell fear, sell convenience, sell status, then sell the fix for the problems those sales create. Cases fill closets because a boil notice once wrecked a week. Pitchers fill fridges because cases started to feel heavy and hypocritical. Cities plan carbon changeouts because lawsuits landed. Each move creates a market for the next. There's a better math. Spend once on a system that works for your source. Share a refill culture that actually refills, no exclusivity, no vending trap. Hold bottlers and utilities to data, not stories. The cheapest gallon is the one that doesn't need a truck or a lawsuit to feel safe. What actually works at home? Even if you're angry at the shelves and the pipes, false hope at home can make things worse. Real fixes exist, but they only work when they match your water. Start with this: know your source. If you're on a city system, pull your latest consumer confidence report and look for the special notices, PFAS advisories, disinfectant byproducts, nitrates, lead, and copper rounds. If you're on a private well, skip the guessing and order a lab kit with chain of custody. You want a baseline, not a vibe. Here, S where the one-size-fits-all pitch breaks. Technologies are tools, not talismans. A simple granular carbon pitcher can help with taste, chlorine, and some organics, but it's not a guaranteed PFAS solution. If you want performance you can bank on, look for certified carbon blocks, not loose granules, with enough bed depth and a clear capacity rating. The label should name the standard, the reduction claim, and the gallon limit before changeout. If it just says, fresh taste, It's selling comfort, not chemistry. Reverse osmosis is the workhorse when you need broad removal. It forces water through a semi-permeable membrane fine enough to be annoying in a good way. Paired with carbon pre- and post-filters, RO cuts many PFAS, nitrates, arsenic, and a raft of other dissolved stuff. You'll waste some water in the process. Modern systems manage the ratio better than older ones, but you should still plan for concentrate going down the drain. For apartments, countertop RO units exist. No drilling, no landlord battles. They're slower than undersink systems, but honest about it. Ion exchange is the sniper. In home units, resins can target specific charged molecules, including certain PFAS. You'll see it as a specialty cartridge in a multi-stage system or as a dedicated canister. The catch: capacity. Once the resin fills up, performance slides and you won't taste it. That's why the change schedule matters more than the unboxing thrill. A calendar beats intuition. Here's a micro story from a renter who couldn't touch the plumbing. Maya lived on the 3rd floor, old building, suspicious pipes. Her city's report flagged PFAS detections just under proposed limits. She bought a faucet filter that promised clean taste. Then she spent a small chunk of rent on a mail-in PFAS test after filtration. The numbers barely moved. She returned it, bought a compact countertop RO with a carbon block and a small ion exchange stage, and ran the output to glass bottles. 2 weeks later, her follow-up lab showed the kind of cuts you can feel in a report, not on your tongue. Her landlord never noticed. Her budget did. Maintenance is the truth serum. Every filter has a curve. Strong early, then a plateau, then decline. You don't want to ride the cliff. Track gallons if your unit estimates them well. If it only tracks time, set reminders with wiggle room. Low pressure at the sink can wreck RO performance. Check for kinks, keep pre-filters fresh, and don't shove the system behind paint can. If your water is very hard, a small softener cartridge before an RO membrane can protect it. But remember, softeners swap ions, they don't clean PFAS. Different tool, different job. If you're on a private well, build a different plan. You need a broad test panel first. Microbials, nitrates, metals, and yes, PFAS if you live near airports, fire training sites, landfills, textile plants, or mysterious industrial parks. Shock chlorination can reset microbes, but it won't touch PFAS. Whole house carbon can help odor and some chemicals for showers and laundry. Point-of-use RO or certified carbon blocks at the kitchen handle what you swallow. If a lab flags a specific metal or pesticide, choose media designed for it. Guessing is expensive. About pitchers and refrigerator filters. Some are legit, some are theater. A solid block pitcher certified for PFAS reduction with a published capacity and flow rate is a different animal than a fast flow mesh that mostly changes taste. Your fridge filter might be great for chlorine and particles, but useless for PFAS unless the manual says otherwise with a standard to match. Read past the marketing paragraph to the spec table. If there is no spec table, that's your answer. Storage matters more than people think. Heat accelerates plastic shedding and can degrade filters waiting on a shelf. Keep replacements cool and dry in their packaging. Store finished water in glass or stainless steel, not a sun-baked case in a trunk. Wash reusable bottles gently. Abrasion creates microplastics you don't want to drink. Replace caps and seals when they crack. Verification closes the loop. If PFAS was your worry, test before and after install once. You don't need to do it monthly. You need to confirm your setup did what the box claimed. Keep the report next to the maintenance schedule. If your city upgrades treatment, retest and adjust, you might be able to simplify. If your city publishes PFAS dashboards, watch trends the way you watch the weather. No panic, just pattern. Money math tilts toward home systems fast. A solid undersink RO with carbon stages or a certified carbon block system, plus one PFAS-focused cartridge can bring your cost per gallon down below a dime after a few months. You'll haul fewer cases, shed less plastic, and stop playing label roulette. For travel, toss a small squeeze filter with a carbon stage in your bag. Airport fountains taste like victory when you trust your kit. The win isn't purity, it's lower exposure with proof. Test, match tech to your water, maintain it, and verify once. That's the path out of panic and into a routine that works whether headlines are calm or loud. Inside the utility, limits and levers. From the utilities side of the meter, every day starts with numbers. In a control room that hums like a library of pumps, a screen tracks flows, pressures, chlorine residuals, turbidity spikes, UV intensity, and alarms that blink when a parameter edges toward a line. Operators pull grab samples at dawn, noon, and night. They run bench tests that smell like high school chemistry and boredom. Most days, the graphs behave. Some days, they don't. Daily testing is a rhythm for the basics: disinfectant levels, pH, temperature, cloudiness. Monthly brings coliform rounds. Quarterly stack on metals. Lead and copper get special sampling at kitchen taps in homes built when regulations were looser, because service lines and solder hide in walls and yards. Emerging contaminants like PFAS, that's where the calendar thins. The utility might test quarterly or semi-annually under a special program or a state order, then wait for a contract lab to confirm parts per trillion data that can wobble with methods and shipping times. It's not apathy. It's bandwidth and budgets meeting lab capacity. Meanwhile, under the streets, the weak link isn't the plant, it's the pipe. Miles of cast iron, ductile iron, PVC, and the occasional mystery alloy carry water through soil that shifts with seasons and truck vibrations. Joints slip, biofilm forms. A hydrant hit by a car can reverse a pressure zone long enough to stir rust and sediment into a brown rush that has nothing to do with safety and everything to do with old metal. Operators chase those ghosts by opening hydrants to flush neighborhoods at 3 a.m., hoping to move the past out of your sink before you make coffee. Corrosion control is alchemy on a deadline. Add a phosphate blend to coat pipe interiors and keep metals from dissolving into water. Balance pH so the coating sticks. Watch alkalinity so chlorine works without making disinfection byproducts climb. Change one dial and two others twitch. The water has to be aggressive enough to be safe, gentle enough to be kind to pipes, and consistent enough that a morning slug of different chemistry doesn't strip a protective layer off a 100-year-old main. When a regulator tightens a limit or adds a contaminant, the response isn't a purchase, it's a process. Capital plans stretch in 5-year chunks. A pilot skid arrives with clear housings and sample ports, and an engineer with a clipboard measures contact time through granular activated carbon. Ion exchange columns get plumbed in parallel to compare resins. An RO pilot hisses in a corner and makes a small stream of concentrate everyone argues about. Sludge, spent carbon, and exhausted resin don't vanish. They become solid waste with PFAS or metals you now have to handle like a secret you can't keep. Where do you ship it? What landfill will take it? What does that contract look like next year? All of this lives inside bond hearings and rate cases. A director stands at a lectern and asks for a few dollars more a month per household to fund carbon changeouts and a new filter building. A council member asks why last year's money wasn't enough. A citizen asks why bottled water seems cheaper than trust. The utility publishes a slide with timelines and photos of shiny vessels. The crowd hears time. Transparency was supposed to help. Dashboards went live with color-coded gauges and PDFs with tables, but the language gap is real. PPB and PPT blur. MCL and HAA5 read like passwords. One utility tried plain language. This month, our plant removed over 90% of the PFAS we tested for. It helped until someone asked, which PFAS? How many? What about the ones you didn't test? Precision and clarity wrestle in every sentence. Meanwhile, operators carry the human weight. A woman named Tasha has run night shift for 9 years. She knows the plant by sound, the pitch of a motor that's tired, the hollow thud of a valve that didn't seat. When a storm loads the river with mud, she ups the coagulant and watches the clarifiers turn to latte. When a freeze snaps a main, she pushes pressure into a zone and texts a crew to set up a boil notice protocol they all hate but can do in their sleep. She's the reason your glass is clear most mornings. She's also the person who has to sign a report when it is. Pilot programs feel like hope and homework. A neighboring city installed deep bed GAC and saw PFAS drop below proposed limits. Your city borrows the spec, adjusts for flow, and calls vendors. The demo looks great. The invoice looks heavy. Resin bids include fine print about disposal fees if the waste stream flags above a threshold. A landfill an hour away will take it this quarter. Next quarter, maybe not. Regulations move and contracts chase them. Utilities can rebuild trust, but proof has to outrun reassurances. That means posting sample results quickly, in words a parent reads at midnight without a glossary, holding open houses where people can touch the pilot skid and ask why the membrane wastes water, mailing letters that name the numbers and the dates without hedging. It also means moving faster than the old Playbook liked, pigging mains before they color a week of sinks, swapping known lead service lines proactively, and standing in front of microphones with the chemist, not the PR team. While cities crawl, crisis hits fast. That's not an excuse, it's the reason the next chapter exists. When water fails overnight, systems rely on people who planned yesterday. Operators like Tasha can only do so much from a control room. The rest depends on how a community practices for
Disaster
bad days
mode.
long before
When
they
water
arrive. Fails overnight. 3 minutes before sunrise, the alert tone sliced through quiet kitchens. Boil water advisory. A line break on the South Trunk main had dropped pressure below safe levels overnight. In living rooms, people stared at faucets like they were strangers. Coffee plans stalled. Text threads woke up faster than the news. At the plant, Tasha was already on her second call. Pressure had recovered, but the rule is the rule. Once negative pressure is in play, you treat it like microbes got a free ride. The city's message said vigorous rolling boil 1 minute. In practice, that meant 1,000 kitchens trying to remember if steam counts. It doesn't. Rolling matters, so does patience. Hospitals didn't wait for patients. The switchboard at County General pinged the incident plan. Sterile water carts rolled toward ICUs. Nurses taped signs over ice machines. A resident who'd been up all night grabbed a coffee maker and watched it sit dry on a counter because even the coffee maker needed safe water. A supervisor radioed facilities, switched the dialysis wing to bypass, and prepped the tanker. While that was happening, pallets of bottled water became triage, not solution. A logistics chief in a reflective vest started calling contacts whose numbers lived on a dog-eared sheet. A wholesaler agreed to divert 2 trucks. A volunteer group with a borrowed forklift texted their list. The first pickup spot set cones. Cars lined up before anyone had a pallet on the ground. Ida, who ran the church pantry, told her team, 1 case per household, 4 if you have elders, no exceptions we can't defend. Across town, a dialysis center worked the problem in 10-minute chunks. Reverse osmosis is life support for those machines. When city pressure drops or quality flags, you can't just wing it. A manager named Joel had a notebook full of if this then that. Today it said call tanker, connect to port B, run inline UV and carbon, test conductivity every 15 minutes. The tanker rolled in with a driver who'd done hurricane runs. The hookup hissed, then steadied. Patients who had been told to wait got chairs. One man dozed with his hands folded like he was praying. He was exhausted. The nurse taped a smiley face on the tank valve anyway like it could bless a fitting. Meanwhile, private wells were dealing with a different kind of overnight. A wildfire 20 miles out had chewed through a canyon 2 summers ago, but the scars hide in plumbing. Heat had turned plastic laterals to mush and sent volatile compounds back through systems that looked fine from the curb. A woman named Sarah thought she'd dodged the worst. Then she poured water for her kid and smelled gasoline. The lab would later say benzene, a ghost from heat and pipe. Her neighbor had installed a gravity filter that does great work on sediments and microbes. It didn't touch benzene. No filter is magic. You need the right tool. By noon, the city had a hydrant testing crew running a route like a postal carrier. They pulled samples into sterile bottles, logged GPS, and dropped them into coolers bound for the contract lab that could turn results fast. Boil notices don't lift because of vibes. They lift because 3 rounds of samples meet a standard. The standard is dull. The relief is. In the parking lot of a high school, pallets sweated under pop-up tents. Water doesn't care about PR, but PR shows up with coolers and logos. A boutique brand's reps handed out shrink-wrapped singles with a smile. They meant well. The logistics chief waved them toward the non-priority lane. Ida's team had real triage, seniors, families with formula, caregivers with lists from home. She knew bottles were bridges, not roads. You can't pallet your way through a week. Here's a micro story from those hours that explains everything. A man walked up holding a small cooler and a note from his wife. Their baby had reflux. The formula had to be mixed a certain way, and the pediatrician had circled boiled then cooled water twice. Ida handed him a kettle from the church kitchen and pointed to the generator. They set a table. They boiled, cooled, labeled 3 jars, and sent him home with enough for 2 days. He cried when he didn't mean to. She cried too, and then kept handing out cases. In apartments, people improvised. A neighbor filled bathtubs for flushing and shared a gravity-fed setup that could handle sediment if the building plumbing belched. Someone posted a map of working refill stations. Another person reminded the thread to skip ice from before the advisory and to run dishwasher cycles on sanitize only after the notice lifted. Smart beats scared when instructions are plain. By afternoon, rumors raced. It's safe now. It was. The city posted updates every 3 hours, naming the neighborhoods, naming the steps. That mattered. People don't need perfect. They need to know where they are in the process. Boil notices feel endless until someone explains the sequence. Pressure stabilized, first samples pulled, lab running, second and third rounds scheduled, expected lift window. The timeline turns panic into a checklist. In neighborhoods where outages were more common, the playbook was smoother. Households had stored water, 1 gallon per person per day for 2 weeks, quietly stacked in closets away from heat. They had gravity filters for sediment and microbes and knew their limits. They had a neighbor network text that beat any press release. Someone always had a spare propane canister. Someone always had a list of apartments where elders lived alone. By evening, the tanker at the dialysis center idled for a cool-down. Joel closed valves and logged numbers with a pen that always worked. He looked at a whiteboard that had been a mess at sunrise and now read like a finished recipe. Across town, Tasha stared at a dashboard that finally felt boring again and waited for the lab to call. When the all-clear landed the next afternoon, cones came up, kettles cooled, and someone turned the ice machines back on with a laugh that sounded like a release valve. Disaster mode teaches a quiet lesson. Bottled pallets are first aid. Resilience is systems, routines, and people. Communities that drill the boring stuff, stored water, kettles, gravity filters that match the risk, neighbor check-ins, don't panic when the alert tone hits. They act. That beats any brand promise stacked 6 feet high in a grocery aisle. Microplastics and the invisible load. Meanwhile, another threat flows through everything you drink, and it doesn't show up on taste buds. A chemist I met held up a clear liter bottle under a lab scope and said, "Looks empty, right?" Then the screen lit up with dots and threads that weren't bubbles or dust, microplastics. When labs use advanced imaging that can see down into the nano range, recent counts in bottled water push toward hundreds of thousands of particles per liter. That's not a typo. You can't see them. Your gut can. Stakes feel abstract until you find the pathways. Start with the cap. Every twist shaves a little plastic. Add the bottling line, rubbing, cutting, sealing, and you've got abrasion points everywhere. Then truck that case across a hot valley, let it bake in a warehouse, and you've created a particle factory. Heat and time don't make plastic friendlier. They make it flake. What nobody knew at the pickup tent yesterday was that the emergency case they grabbed might carry more microplastics than their tap on a normal day. Studies keep coming back with the same pattern. Bottled water, on average, shows higher counts than municipal tap. Not because tap is holy, but because the bottle, the cap, the line, and the trip add extras you didn't ask for. The brand's glacier photo doesn't change the physics of friction. Meanwhile, refill culture came to the rescue and quietly made a new problem. Steel bottles dent, plastic ones scratch. Every brush in a sink, every drop onto concrete, every ride in a bike cage scuffs the inside. Those scuffs shed too. You don't need to panic and toss everything. You just need to treat bottles like cookware. Gentle sponge, no sandpaper scrubs, and retire them when they look like they went to war. Here's where it gets weirder. Microplastics don't travel alone. They're taxis for chemicals. PFAS, phthalates, flame retardants, and other hitchhikers can cling to surfaces or leach from the plastic itself. Early research links particles to inflammation and immune responses in animals. Human studies are still catching up, and serious scientists use careful language. But the sane guidance matches what you already learned with PFAS. Lower exposure where you can. Micro story to make it human. Ramon, the retiree with the pH obsession, kept a favorite bottle he dropped so many times the logo looked like a fossil. His granddaughter took it to her campus lab on open house day. Under a scope, the inner surface looked like a plowed field. He didn't need a lecture. He needed a replacement. He swapped to a new steel bottle, hand-washed it gently, and noticed something unexpected. The water tasted cleaner because it wasn't picking up yesterday's scratches. Meanwhile, labs started playing before and after. A tech pulled 3 bottled brands, measured particle counts, then ran the same water through a tight carbon block and in another rig a compact RO. The results didn't read 0. Don't chase that myth, but they dropped. Carbon grabbed a portion. RO did more depending on membrane rating and profiltration. Was it worth filtering bottled water? In a boil notice week, probably not. In daily life, why not filter the tap and skip the bottle in the first place? Heat is the silent multiplier. A case in a trunk on a summer day turns into a plastic sauna. A vending machine next to a sunny window can run warm enough to matter. You can't control every mile your water travels, but you can control the last few feet. Don't store cases in hot garages. Don't leave a bottle on a dashboard like it's decor. If a bottle smells like a pool toy aisle, let it go. Manufacturers have their own rituals. Some switch resins, tweak caps, polish lines, and boast about low-shedding processes. Good, ask for data. If a brand claims fewer particles, they should show method, counts, and sample size. If they wave toward industry-leading standards without a number, you're reading poetry again. Remember the label maze? This is the same hallway, new door. What about glass? It avoids plastic shedding from the container itself, but the cap liner and bottling line can still contribute. Also, glass bottles ride the same hot trucks if the logistics team isn't careful. Glass equals pure is a mood, not a measurement. If a brand bottles in glass and posts rigorous lab panels, including particle counts and PFAS lists, you've got something to work with. Most don't. Home routines beat heroics. Use glass or stainless for storage. Replace gaskets and caps when they crack. Wash with a soft brush and mild soap. Retire battle-scarred bottles. If you love carbonated water, make it at home with clean feed water. Fizzing can jostle particles loose in pre-bottled products. If you meal prep, water prep, fill clean containers, store them cool and dark, rotate weekly. Here's the mindset shift that calms the room. Perfect purity is a fantasy that sells well and solves nothing. Lower exposure is the win you can repeat. Filter the water that matters, what you drink, what you mix into baby formula, what you brew coffee with. Treat containers like tools with lifespans. Buy less logistics, do more maintenance. The particles won't vanish tomorrow. Your risk can step down today. And when a brand tells you their water is like snowmelt, ask them to show you the blizzard of data. If they can't, you already know what to drink and where it should come from. Countries that got it right. If purity is a myth, honesty has to do the heavy lifting. There are places that chose honesty on purpose, and it worked. Start in Denmark, where water utilities treat transparency like a service, not a favor. A parent opens a city website and sees near real-time dashboards, turbidity, chlorine, nitrate, and this is key, plain language notes. If something drifts out of range, a banner explains what changed and when it'll be fixed. There's a PDF for engineers, sure, but the front page reads like a weather app. Safe to drink. Maintenance at plant Orson 14, 0018, 00. Temporary taste changes expected. It sounds small. It is. It sets a tone, will tell you first, fast, and clearly. Meanwhile, Denmark didn't wait on every federal debate before drawing lines. When PFAS signals grew, the country pushed EU partners for broad restrictions and tightened national procurement rules so agencies don't buy products that shed problem chemicals. Fire brigades phased out legacy foams. Municipal bids started saying no PFAS-added gear. That's procurement with teeth. It doesn't fix the past. It stops digging. Hop north to Norway. Water boards post quality data with short explanations and links to full lab tables. A resident with 5 minutes can grasp the month's results without a glossary. If a plant pilots granular activated carbon for PFAS, the utility publishes the test setup, the resin type, the bed depth, and the before and after chart. It's nerdy and neighborly at once. The effect shows up where it counts. Trust. When people see the work, bottled demand softens from reflex to backup. The structure behind that trust matters. In parts of the Nordics, utilities are publicly owned and locally governed. Boards include citizen voices used to reading budgets and asking direct questions. When a system needs new vessels, the timeline goes public with the bid, not as an afterthought. Rate increases tied to milestones. Miss a milestone, explain it next Tuesday in a room with chairs and coffee. That cadence doesn't make treatment cheaper. It makes it legible, which is its own kind of insurance. Here's a micro-story a director in Aarhus told me. A resident named Leif used to call monthly to complain about chemical taste. Instead of sending him a brochure, the plant manager invited him to the control room. Leif watched a raw water turbidity spike after a storm and saw how coagulant feed changed in minutes. He tapped the screen like he'd found a magic trick. A week later, he showed up with pastries and 2 more neighbors. Complaints didn't vanish. They changed shape from fear to process questions. The difference matters. Policy followed the culture. Nordic countries pressed the EU to treat PFAS as a class for restrictions, not just chase one compound at a time. That upstream move means fewer regrettable substitutions trickling into consumer goods and ultimately into water. Denmark went further in some sectors, restricting PFAS in food contact materials and textiles for children. Procurement policies forced vendors to prove absence, not just promise it. The message to markets was simple. Bring products that won't haunt our taps. While that was happening in ministries, local utilities got practical. Some installed deep bed GAC with enough contact time to matter. Others paired ion exchange to catch short-chain PFAS that sneak through carbon. Plants invested in better source protection, buffer zones around well fields, tighter oversight of industrial discharges, and real penalties for violators. It wasn't glamorous, it was relentless, and it showed up in dashboards that didn't hide behind acronyms. Not every example sits in the Nordics. On a small island nation that relies on rain and a shallow aquifer, residents got tired of roller coaster summers. The water board, community-owned, put rain capture on public buildings and fed storage into a managed aquifer recharge system. When drought hit, the utility didn't post "pray for rain." It posted reservoir levels, pump schedules, and which neighborhoods would get pressure reductions, and when. They protected the lens beneath their feet with land use rules and ferocious leak hunting. Bottled aisles didn't vanish, they shrank. The human angle keeps this from sounding like a tech brochure. A mother named Seen in Copenhagen told me she used to buy cases for the kids' soccer days. Then her utility launched a kids' dashboard with cartoons that explained where water comes from, what PFAS are, and why a new filter building was going up by the river. At practice, refill stations showed up with chillers and a sign that read, "This is your water, ask us anything." The cases stopped coming, not because she felt shamed, but because she felt included. There were missteps, too. A Norwegian plant ran a GAC bed too shallow in its first pilot and saw breakthrough early. They posted the failure, swapped media, and explained the fix in a 1-minute video that got more views than any press release that year. When a lab flagged a PFAS uptick after heavy rain, the utility didn't bury it in a quarterly. They led with it on the homepage, named the number, the suspected source, and the interim steps. Bottled sales bumped for a weekend. Then they went back to baseline. The pattern is plain. Transparency plus precaution plus community ownership changes behavior. People drink from taps they understand. Bottled water returns to its rightful job, backup, not default. When a city publishes real-time data and admits mistakes fast, residents cut brands less slack for selling snowcaps and vibes. And that's the quiet victory. Confidence built on proof reduces the market for fear. Your 7-day water reset. Right now this week. You don't fix trust with slogans. You fix it with a week of small moves that change what comes out of your glass. Day 1, pull the facts. If you're on city water, download your latest consumer confidence report and any PFAS updates. Most utilities post them online. Don't get lost in acronyms. Circle the sections on disinfectants, lead and copper nitrates, and any PFAS notes. If you're on a private well, or if your house sits near airports, fire training sites, landfills, textile plants, or light industrial parks, order a targeted lab kit with chain of custody. You want numbers that hold up at a town meeting, not guesses. Day 2, match tech to your water. With your report or preliminary risks in hand, pick a solution you can install without drama. If chlorine taste and organics are your main problem, choose a certified solid carbon block with a stated capacity and a contaminant reduction standard, not just improves taste. If PFAS shows up or is likely, add a PFAS-rated cartridge, ion exchange stage, or go to a compact reverse osmosis unit with carbon pre-post filters. Apartment. Countertop RO exists. No drilling, no landlord lecture. Print the spec sheet. Your future self will thank you. Day 3, fix containers and storage. Retire battle-scarred bottles. Swap most plastics for glass or stainless steel. Keep a lightweight plastic only for places where glass is risky. Replace cracked caps and gaskets. Stop heat cooking your water. No cases in cars or sunny windows. For the fridge, set a top shelf for finished water in labeled glass jars. If you meal prep, water prep, fill, date, and rotate weekly. Gentle wash, soft brush, no scouring pads. Scratches shed. Day 4, build your emergency stash. 1 gallon per person per day, 2 weeks if you can swing it. That sounds big, it's not insane. Stack sealed containers in a cool closet, not the garage sauna. Add a gravity filter that handles sediment and microbes for outage days. Know its limits, it's not a benzene fix. Toss a kettle in the stash because boil advisories love mornings. Add a small squeeze filter with a carbon stage to your go bag. Label a notebook water plan and tape it inside the closet door. Day 5, verify and calibrate. If PFAS was your concern, pull a post-install sample and send it to the same lab you used baseline with. You're not chasing zero, you're looking for lower and repeatable. If chlorine and taste were the issue, run a simple residual test and log results. Set maintenance reminders in your phone with buffer time before capacity ends. Check pressure, low pressure guts RO performance, clear kinks, replace pre-filters, and keep salt off any softener that sits nearby. Write filter model numbers and dates on painter's tape stuck to the housing. Day 6, extend the bubble work, school, travel, map refill stations on your commute. Keep a clean stainless bottle at your desk and one at home, rotate them. If your kid's school pushes singles at lunch, pack a labeled bottle and a short note for the teacher that says, "He refills here." For road trips, bring a compact bottle-top filter with a carbon stage and use hotel kettles for a rolling boil when advisories pop up. If your office posts a vague meet standards flyer, ask for the latest independent test and whether the building filters before fixtures. Polite, specific questions move mountains. Day 7, share and push. Post your before-after results in your neighborhood group with the gear you used and the maintenance schedule that actually works. Not vibes, receipts. Email your utility asking for PFAS numbers in plain language on a simple dashboard with dates and methods. If your city is voting on bonds for treatment upgrades, show up with your lab report and ask for milestone-tied spending. Pilot by this date, bed depth by this spec, change-out interval posted here. If your school has an exclusivity contract that blocks refills, ask the board to ban beverage lock-ins and install chillers by the fields. Bring 3 lines of text and 1 page of data. Micro story, Tasha did this week quietly. She printed her CCR, circled the PFAS note, bought a countertop RO with a PFAS-rated carbon block, swapped her scratched bottle and stacked a modest stash, 1 shelf, 6 labeled jugs. On day 5, her lab report came back, numbers down not to 0 but down. She posted the chart in her building chat. 2 neighbors asked for the model number. On day 7, she forwarded her results to the utility with 1 request. Please post PFAS in plain language next to chlorine and turbidity. 2 weeks later, the director replied with a link to a new line on the dashboard. Small, sure, real, absolutely. Here's the payoff most people don't expect. By next month, your cost per gallon will slide under a dime if you picked well and maintain it. Your recycling bin will weigh less. The emergency text tone won't spike your heart rate. And when a brand whispers pure, you'll hear prove it in your own voice. Individual fixes aren't the finish line. They're the floor, but floors change how you walk. You'll drink from your tap because you shaped it, tested it, and keep it honest. And that confidence buys you the bandwidth to push the system without burning out. How to push for system change. Individual fixes gave you breathing room. System change makes breathing room the default. Here, as how regular people move a water system without shouting, starting with the only thing bureaucracies respect: clean data. Show up with numbers that travel. That means sampling done right, chain of custody, accredited labs, documented methods. If your building or block wants answers, organize a sampling day. Split costs, assign a point person, and log everything: locations, dates, temperatures. Pull a baseline before filters, then an after sample at 1 kitchen for proof of concept. When you meet your utility, you're not waving anecdotes. You're handing over a packet a city attorney can't dismiss as Facebook. Name your ask with a clock on it. Publish PFAS data is a slogan. Post PFAS results monthly in plain language next to chlorine and turbidity by July 1 using method 533 with a 1-page explainer is a plan. Tie PFAS to procurement. All new treatment bids must disclose bed depth, contact time, resin type, and disposal plans. Real treatment isn't magic, it's specs. Force specs into daylight. Push for timelines that survive elections. When the EPA's enforceable PFAS limits land, your utility will draft a compliance plan. Get that plan into public record with milestones. Pilot start, pilot results posted, funding vote date, construction start, first bed online, change out schedule. If the council approves bonds, ask them to write benchmarks into the ordinance. Miss a date, trigger a hearing. Bureaucracies hate timers. That's why you need one. Or where the money hides, budgets and contracts. Ask your school board to ban beverage exclusivity deals that turn kids into customers and fountains into props. Demand refill stations with chillers on fields and in gyms, funded in the same line that used to rent vending space. Ask the city to write PFAS-free into purchasing, turnout gear, food contact materials, carpets, so chemicals don't boomerang into your water later. Procurement does more prevention than press releases ever will. Right-to-know laws are your oxygen. Support rules that force utilities to publish machine-readable data, CSV, not just PDFs, so anyone can chart trends. Push for plain language summaries mailed with bills. This month, our PFAS results were X and Y PPT, our limit is Z. Here's the treatment step we took. Advocate for QR codes on hydrants that link to neighborhood sampling results and project timelines. If it sounds nerdy, it is. It's also how trust grows fast. Bring allies who can't be waved off. Clinicians who see thyroid clusters, firefighters who can speak to foam, farmers who watched a buyer pause milk after a PFAS test. Put them at the mic. When a pediatrician says, limit exposure where you can, and a plant manager explains contact time, it's not theater. It's cross-checks in public. Use the courts as a lever, not a lullaby. If your city is part of a PFAS settlement, ask how dollars map to equipment, beds, and dates. If they hide behind active litigation, read the settlement summary and ask the narrow questions that force daylight. What vessel size? Which resin? What disposal contract? What interim targets? Lawsuits shake trees. Budgets catch fruit. Make meetings visual. Bring a poster of your block with sampling pins. Bring 2 test tubes like that dad at town hall, pre- and post-treatment in your own kitchen. Bring a 1-page specs we want in writing sheet. Officials remember pictures, so do neighbors. Not everyone reads a parts per trillion table under fluorescent lights. Don't ignore sludge. PFAS caught on carbon and resin doesn't vanish. Ask where exhausted media goes, which landfill takes it, and how leachate is managed. Request quarterly summaries, pounds of media replaced, PFAS concentrations, disposal destinations. You're not nitpicking. You're closing loops so today's fix doesn't become tomorrow's plume. Vote like water matters. Support bond measures that fund treatment tied to posted benchmarks. Elect council members who have toured the plant, not just the ribbon cuttings. If a candidate talks business-friendly while dodging specifics on aquifer protection and industrial discharge permits, ask them on camera to define friendly for your kitchen tap. Make system wins visible. When the dashboard adds PFAS, screenshot it and post the link. When a refill chiller appears at a field, celebrate the board member who backed it. When a bid lists bed depth and resin type, thank the procurement officer by name. Positive pressure keeps doors open longer than outrage alone. Finally, keep the cadence human. Quarterly check-ins with your utility, a mailing list that isn't just for anger, and a standing agenda item at neighborhood meetings. Water status, milestones, and next asks. Systems change when people act like a patient drumbeat, not a single cymbal crash. You're not trying to become a water expert. You're trying to make expertise show its work. When it does, bottled water slides back to backup. The default becomes what it should have been all along. Safe, boring tap you don't have to think about. Clean water isn't a luxury product. It's the baseline you're owed, measured in parts per trillion and proven in public. If you want receipts, we'll show you how to test, filter, and push your city with data that moves budgets. Subscribe, share this with one friend who buys cases weekly, then watch our deep dive on healthy product claims that quietly fail the lab.